welcome back. Today we are bringing you the 7th episode of FinCrime Insiders. I'm your host, Skylar Palmer, and I'm here with Lauren Schaefer and our special guest this afternoon, Navin Burns. We're excited to be talking about all things financial crimes compliance. You can look forward to hearing Navin answer 5 questions ranging from details about her professional background to the industry nuances she has experienced while in financial crimes. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone watching or listening that the views and opinions expressed on FinCrime Insiders are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their past, current, or future employers. Any content provided by our webcast, hosts, or participants are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. Awesome. Now that we got that spiel done with, Navin, thanks for joining us today. Lauren, welcome back. I'm going to have to start cutting your pay from 0 to negative, but, finally, nice for you to join us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to finally be on.
Yeah, I know. We were dealing with the technical difficulties before we even got started here, so we're here, though. We're here, and we're ready to go. I think we're over 130 subscribers now, so thank you all for listening, watching. Hopefully, Navin will put us over 200. She's got a lot of friends, I don't know. But that's the idea here. But all right, we'll go ahead and get this started then. So Navin, I know you're a senior AML analyst and anti-money laundering analyst, and you conduct investigations within the Financial Crimes Compliance Department. But can you please tell us your official job title?
Yes, I am a senior AML analyst. I've been at my financial institution for 7 years. It's a regional commercial bank.
Awesome. And now within your team, what does the structure look like?
So Financial Crimes Compliance Department, I am in the alert triage unit. So there's maybe like 10 or 12 people on that team split up into even smaller teams. So there's about 5 of us that report to one team lead. And we all see everything cradle to grave. We do alerts, cases, and SARS.
Okay.
And we file SARS on, AML and fraud.
And fraud. All right. And how do you receive, or how do you work the fraud, I guess?
We work closely with our fraud team. Some of the AML analysts have transitioned to the fraud team. So what they do is we have a special inbox and they send their referrals to that inbox, and then we create manual alerts from the fraud. And so the fraud team will do an initial investigation, and then the AML analyst will create a manual alert and review the details of the investigation. And then we kind of put it together in a SAR narrative form and maybe do like a deeper dive. We're pulling check images if we're doing a SAR on counterfeit fraud, for example. So we get referrals in the email, and then we can, if the SAR filing threshold is met, that we can escalate it to a SAR and write a SAR.
Okay. And now to specify, I guess, the way that it goes is that as the AML analyst, you're kind of just the SAR filing body. So you're not actually conducting any of like the clawback of potential lost funds or account takeovers, like locking down accounts and things like that, correct?
Exactly right.
All right. I'm sure that's going to be interesting to a lot of people. I know personally speaking about that, it is it's usually like wait, how does that work again? I believe it's called FROML, but I think it's a very unique approach of FROML, or FRAML.
FRAML.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Well, appreciate you for giving us a little more details about your professional background there. We can go ahead and slide right into question 2. Lauren, go ahead.
So thanks, Navin, for joining us. For question 2, what kind of trends are you, your team, and your institution noticing? Is there an increase in any type of specific typology or filing, scams, etc.?
Great question. We are seeing so much fraud, especially check fraud. We're also seeing business identity theft. So that would be a bad actor creating an account with a very similar name to a legitimate business and using that to move illicit funds. We are also seeing mortgage loan fraud. And we do see structuring as well, and just unusual source of funds. So just trying to follow the money if we don't really know where it's going. And so unusual cash activity would be the main AML concern that I see.
Now, with the fraud businesses, is this some sort like a part of business email compromise? Like they're appearing to be legitimate vendors, but it's not the actual vendors themselves. They just happen to have a business registered similar to that
I think
company?
both of those happen. So we could have someone that's creating a business that has almost an identical name to a real business. They're registering with their Secretary of State. They're getting checks maybe from the US Treasury, legitimate checks, and then trying to deposit those checks and withdraw the funds. So just acting as if they're a real business, but moving their cash around and issuing checks in a way that is very suspicious and doesn't match the real business. And then as far as businesses being compromised, we do see a lot of business email compromise as well. And so that would be maybe our customer's vendor would be a victim of their system was compromised or their email is compromised. So we do see some of our business clients sending checks or ACH payments to someone that they under the assumption that they are paying their vendor, and then their vendor will follow up on an invoice or something, and then that's when our customer can realize that they paid the wrong party, and in that case those funds are not often recovered.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, since it is a commercial bank, the fraud that you mentioned is kind of prevalent. Like what business line or type of accounts are being or experiencing this type of fraud?
I think it could be any kind of business, really. Some personal accounts, but a lot of business accounts. So homeowners associations are a pretty big target because they have so many, like a property manager may manage dozens of different homeowners associations, and we might bank several of those. So maybe their checkbooks are getting stolen, or somehow their legitimate checks are getting intercepted or obtained some way by a bad actor. So we do see a lot of the victims of check fraud as homeowners associations, but it could really be any type of business, law firms, doctors' offices, all kinds of businesses.
Okay, so this is a topic that's usually debatable. Filing SAR on these fraudulent checks, however they were intercepted or obtained or things like that. What's your version of mail theft? Because I know right, FinCEN just released an updated guidance on what mail theft is supposed to be. You know, that checkbox in there, because a lot of times the referrals are like, my check was stolen, but that doesn't necessarily constitute mail theft. I know there's a lot of parameters around that, but what do you think? Can you describe what that is?
Right. And sometimes the customer might not report something accurately. We see all the time customers reporting a check as altered, but it's actually counterfeit. So they may report a check stolen and it's not. They could do a mobile deposit and then they don't shred their check or dispose of it properly. And so no one's really stealing anything. They're just picking up a check that they found in the trash or the ground or something.
Yep.
For mail theft, I believe it qualifies as mail theft if checks are stolen from the United States Postal Service or from a mailbox. Like the mail system.
Yeah.
Carriers have to be involved directly.
Yeah, I'm sure all of us can attest. We've been in some meetings discussing that topic on more than one occasion.
Or mail fraud. What did they receive it via the postal service? Because then they're trying to commit fraud. It kind of feels like, well, don't most people get their checks via the mail? Like it, besides your comment about the mobile deposits or hearing stories of people finding checks in parking garages.
Right.
Like
or maybe
usually, I feel like
right.
usually they're going to be receiving them via the postal service of some sort.
Right. Or maybe they go to a vacant, like the mailbox of a vacant business or apartment or something, and take a legitimate check out of there and use that to as their basis to make counterfeit checks.
Yeah,
That's true too.
It's all very prevalent. Check fraud is honestly at like the all-time high, I believe, is the latest statistics, and it's kind of funny because that's like it was like the true fraudulent activity, true fraud criminals back in the day when checks were used everywhere, buying groceries, things like that. So I don't think anybody would have imagined it being so prevalent still, in 2024 going into 2025, but it is still an issue. I'm still flabbergasted, I guess, seeing how many businesses pay with checks, or loosely pay with checks. And same thing goes with like sending wires, right? They just get an email from Joe Schmo vendor, and the vendor's like, "Hey, send me $1 million over here. Don't worry that it's in uh, I don't know, Colombia. We have a small office out of there. That's why it's getting sent there." But so yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I guess, would you say primary makeup of your work? What does that look? AML money laundering investigations compared to fraud investigations?
Good question. A main difference is that on the AML side of things, we do transaction monitoring. So we work alerts, which refers to the transactions that are getting flagged in our system for having any kind of unusual pattern detected, whether it's a spike in cash, ACH, wire sent to a high risk region, something like that, just any change in behavior outside of the norm for our customers. So the transaction monitoring is a real difference we see. And then we do end up clearing most of our alerts because most businesses are just operating business as usual. And then when we do see something that may be concerning or we want to investigate deeper, we can escalate that to case. And so I think that's the main difference, is the transaction monitoring. And then we have the autonomy to escalate from alert to case, and again, case to SAR if warranted.
And with the cradle to grave, what are your thoughts? You like it, or
I like it a lot.
Have you previously worked in individual roles, like a just alert team to I don't even know, a case team to a SAR team?
Yeah. So at my first employer in the industry, we did do cradle to grave. So when I was entry level in this field, I started out cradle to grave. And then when I came to my current role, it was a little bit more siloed. So I was just focused on alerts, and it went on that way for a couple years. And now, the last few years, it has been cradle to grave. And I think a lot of us like it better that way. It's just a more varied and dynamic, like, pace of environment. It's more interesting that way, and we just are exposed to more.
Wait, Lauren, any last thoughts?
Do you find Cradle to Grave gives you like the ability to send more like R5s or 314 requests that like mitigate maybe your concerns?
I think so. And then also just collaborating with the team. So I do send RFIs. Before, when I was just at the alert level, if I saw something that was maybe just confusing, or I was spending too much time on it, or just wasn't quite adding up, we would just, if we couldn't make sense of it in a pretty short time frame, we would just send it up to case. We weren't really the ones that were sending RFIs, or if we did, maybe we didn't have enough time to receive an answer back before our like 30-day clock stopped. And so now that we are doing cradle to grave, I am sending RFIs, and I do have ownership of that alert or case long enough to get a response. And then depending on the response, if it's sufficient, then I can go ahead and clear out the alert before it gets all the way up to a SAR. And that just really helps downstream. That way I'm not filing SARs and renewing SARs or discontinuing SARs based on something that could have been mitigated by one sentence, like, oh, that's their accountant, and this golf course company sends a wire to this company in United Arab Emirates because that's just their accountant. Okay, great. Now I know. Like, that makes sense. Like, I can email the personnel at the branch, the relationship manager, and they likely know the individual customer on a personal level, and they can give us more information. And then if something still isn't adding up, we can make our own decision and use our own judgment and intuition to file a SAR if we need to. So I think it's really good that we do the cradle to grave. And then also just since we do have the ownership and just knowing like this is going to stay with me for maybe 90 days plus, and I'm not just trying to like get it off my desk, I can message my team and say, hey, like, what does this mean? What does this look like to you? Does this match their occupation? How would the person in this type of role, why do they have these large, like, just why are they moving their money in this way? And then we can put our heads together, or even just Google something like, oh, that's their inheritance. That's why this person in this type of job that isn't very high paying got $1 million from a deceased relative that won a lawsuit. So that kind of thing, we can put our heads together especially when we know we have ownership of that alert.
Yeah,
So
I think actually you guys make a good point as far as a big positive as far as working cradle to grave is allowing you the flexibility to pursue, all those avenues. Unlike when it's in individual teams, where you're just triaging alerts and then you're just doing no SAR or SAR dispositions, right? And then the actual SAR team gets it and they file the SAR. That kind of eliminates some of that flexibility from each of those individuals, the time that it permits to get a response from an RFI or even a 314B, because we know those can take much longer if you ever get a response back. So I guess that's definitely a positive there from the cradle to grave.
Yeah, I also think it's helpful for like other alerts that aren't related to the one that you're working or the case that you're working. Like, oh, okay, well, this answer is sufficient for this law firm. So if I see this again, this will help. Where, yeah, I think when you're compartmentalized and just alerts and you're not ever seeing that answer, you just keep escalating, never really understanding that that is normal pattern. So,
right. And then we might not even think to follow up on it. If you're only working the alerts, you probably aren't going to think to check back in 30 days and see, oh, did that clear that out or did that go to SAR? So we might just keep kind
you're
of
very pigeonholed when you do one thing or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great.
I used to follow my escalation, my alert escalations, and then I'd get mad whenever they'd get no SAR, and I'd be like, "What the hell, man?" But
send it back. I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody has a different opinion, so that's for sure. It's mostly structuring, so we know those ones are very objective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, right on. Sweet. We'll move on to question 3 then. Do you have any interesting investigations or maybe just like a scenario alert that you worked through the process that, kind of like you're explaining how you may have went down the rabbit hole and then you were sending out RFIs and then you were 314Bs, you were open source searching and you came across this person is worked at a clown factory and he inherited a bunch of money, just any interesting investigation that you'd like to give us more details about, kind of how you received it. The process of you working through it, maybe the outcome, maybe it wasn't as bad as you initially thought, or it's extremely terrible and you immediately contacted law enforcement.
Right. So one that immediately comes to mind, you guys have maybe heard me talk about this before. You've definitely heard me talk about this. It was from a branch referral. The branch referrals are really helpful with spotting that unusual cash activity and the customer behavior. They're on the front lines. And it's the kind of thing where they see it maybe a full month before the alert will get it to me, because in November, we're reviewing the October alerts. So it's nice to get that head start. So I did have a branch referral right from a teller saying that a customer came in making a large cash deposit. It was over $400,000, and that was concerning. And they couldn't really provide a reasonable explanation of how they had all that cash on hand. They are in the medical profession, so that is a high-paying profession. But even still, why would you have that much money all at the same time? And they said they had just been keeping their business earnings at home for over a decade. So they came in to deposit the cash. They wanted to pay off a loan they had with us. And so they were able to pay off their loan that they opened with us years prior. because the money itself wasn't counterfeit or anything. So they were able to do that. And then where it got really interesting was just the way they used that money after the just the rest of the funds that wasn't used to pay off the loan. They were issuing a lot of cashier's check to themselves and to family members. And we were just following the money, we saw a lot of negative news on this individual. They had opened their personal account pretty recently with our bank and had a lot of negative news, a lot of fraud, some opioid sales, like with prescription, and some Medicaid fraud and all kinds of things. So that was really taking us all over the place because they had just opened this personal account only this year where we were made aware of all the fraud, but really they had other accounts with my bank for years. And so a lot of the activity did appear legitimate at first. Like they did have a real loan and they did pay off that loan, and they did get payments from Medicaid, but it was just a lot of other stuff they were doing. Like, why did they issue themselves that many checks? Like, why wasn't it just one large one? So that kind of thing.
So it was a business, I presume. That's why they got the loan, is a business loan.
Yeah.
And then the referral from the branch was due to a cash deposit or withdrawal?
A deposit.
Because into that personal account that they just opened?
It was on the personal account. So the account had only been open for a few months at that time. And they brought in all that cash to make a payment on their loan. And it just didn't add up why you would have that much money sitting at home if you were accruing interest on your commercial loan you had. It just wasn't adding up.
Yeah.
Just irrational behavior. And their demeanor, they were getting really irritated with the bank staff when they were asking follow-up questions. And then just the negative news that we found really lined up with the transactions we were seeing.
What type of filing then was this?
I checked a lot of boxes.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of the cash related ones, like unknown source of cash. Is that one of them?
Yeah, a lot of unknown source of cash, transactions with no apparent economic or lawful purpose. There was some stuff that we didn't. I'm trying to think if there was ACH fraud. The monetary instruments, because there was cashier's checks and regular checks and cash.
Gotcha.
Yeah, those were the main points.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, was this something, I guess, that like, well, you kind of hinted at it, that like you probably wouldn't have put it together if it wasn't for the branch referral, as you hinted that like there was kind of relationships,
right? Or it would have
for a while,
right? Or it would have taken longer, because if I would have seen that a month later and I would have just seen this is a new account, they had some wires with a title company before, I could have thought maybe this is from like a real estate type of situation. They're a doctor, like if without knowing the behavior of the client and just also following up and noticing the way they were using that cash.
Yeah.
I hope I would have still made the same decision, but it was definitely much easier and just more straightforward that it came from a branch referral.
Yeah. Sounds definitely interesting. And I think it provides good perspective as far as how sometimes a lot of customer activity, either which way, right? A lot of times activity looks really weird, but in all actuality, you kind of go hunt it down to find all the nitty gritty details, and then it makes a clearer picture. And you're like, oh, actually, that does make sense. And then vice versa. You think that this business account is running a business, but if you don't know the indicators to look for, maybe there's internal funding that's happening between multiple accounts. If you're not looking at those other accounts that are funding your one account, then you can easily bypass like the actual unusual stuff that appears to be normal and expected business activity, right?
And then another thing we are seeing is those digital accounts that are opening. So that's people opening accounts without physically going into the bank, and we do notice some of those accounts are open just for the purpose of conducting fraud.
Yeah, that one makes sense too. There's a lot of ways to move money now, so I think just wherever the people can do it, they'll try to do it, and there's no rhyme or reason not to, honestly, because if they get turned down from the online account opening, then they just do it under a different identity or a different company, or they go and try it at a different institution or money service business, and it's, they can do that probably 1,000 times before it actually catches law enforcement attention or something that they feel like they should be nervous to do it anymore.
But if they already have so many stolen identities or whatnot, it probably doesn't even affect them.
Yeah. Well, so I guess too, from that point too, I guess it's kind of interesting, because a lot of times from our perspective, right, as financial crime investigators at financial institutions, a lot of times with these fraudulent account openings or things like that, we don't actually know who is the subject. Like, is the person opening an account using, victim identification, or is this person actually opening an account with real identification and they are the scammers themselves or the people that are facilitating this illicit activity? And there's so much unknowns behind it. And I'm sure like SARS get filed both ways, right? Like, oh, they appear to be the bad actor themselves.
Yeah, I've had that too, where I have named them a subject. If they're the ones going to the branch presenting the check and we have their name, we don't for sure know their involvement, and we don't really have enough information either way. But depending on all the circumstances, I could name them a subject, and I have done that in the past.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thanks for giving us details on that. That's definitely an interesting one. And like I said, provides a good picture and perspective as far as how these investigations work. Now, the question 4, in regard to any of your experience, what is an issue that has impacted you, your team, or your institution the most in regard to like your ability to complete your day-to-day responsibilities, or effectively or efficiently knock out your workload, or maybe just identify actual illicit activity rather than just checking boxes for some compliance purposes?
Right. I think an issue would be the technical side of things, the platform that we use. I don't know if I can name it. I won't.
All right.
Yeah, so just the system that we use that monitors the alerts and pulls all the alerts. It's some things are a little cumbersome. There's a lot of clicking around. We use a lot of different platforms to do a lot of different things. So it could be more streamlined. We have one platform that we use to view checks, another one to view like a more like cohesive like list of all the transactions. And there's just a lot of websites and avenues we go on just to check a few things, and lots of clicking around and lots of manual stuff. So that's definitely a big setback. Yeah. And then just a high volume of alerts to go through, because most of them are cleared out. But we do have a high volume of alerts that we're all responsible for, in addition to the cases in SARS and discontinue SARS that we do. So just balancing all of those, I think the high volume and the platform we use are some hindrances at times.
Now with the platform, the transaction monitoring and case management is all in one. And then
it's supposed to be ideally.
Yeah. And but now, do you have to export transactions or like from the database to actually like manipulate the data?
I do export the transactions, and then I will separate my credits from my debits. Maybe more than one account is triggering at a time that are under the same umbrella, the same ownership. So just lots of clicking, lots of filtering, lots of exporting.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Well, keeps you employed, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
I think a positive though, I guess, because the one that always comes back to me, Lauren, Tanya, who we had on initially, and she talked about their systems at her institution and how she also did have to go through a bunch of different platforms to get information, but they had timeout features, which I know some of the databases or programs that are used to also kind of have some timeout features, or you can't have up multiple tabs right at once. You got to use different browsers. So yeah, I guess just those are kind of the little nuances, but I can imagine having to relog in all the time.
Yeah, that sounded way worse than what I'm dealing with.
Yeah. Well, that was a much larger financial institution, retail, commercial, all that. So that's probably ancient technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, sweet. Yeah, that's pretty much in line with I think the industry standard is technology, and then workload, work volume, right? People are up to their ears in dispositioning alerts, or I guess in your regard, responding to a lot of fraud related matters, even though you're not a fraud analyst or fraud investigator, just because the sole fact that you are a part of the SAR filing body, and those fraud SARs come through your working group. I can see how that gets a little over cumbersome.
Yeah, I do like the fraud though. I like the exposure I'm getting to it and being quite proficient at it by now. So I wouldn't have had that opportunity if they had the capabilities in the system to file their own SARs. I wouldn't know as much as I know about fraud. So I'm glad for the knowledge I have about fraud now.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
It's great for your resume, definitely.
Kind of, but I always say, the title has to reflect the responsibilities. Otherwise,
I agree.
It's
You're
taken
right.
halfway. Like I'm telling you, if you go and talk about your situation, your setup of like your structure of your team and how you work fraud, how you're filing fraud SARs, but the fraud team is doing the actual loss prevention and customer
and they're emailing with the customer and the branches.
Yeah, and all that stuff. Like people's eyes will probably roll in the back of their head and be like, "That doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of that once in life." So it is what it is. But I guess I'd recommend if you are to apply for a fraud role, I would just kind of tailor the title of your role slightly different. I don't know, financial crime specialist,
mm-hmm. Fraud and AML.
yeah, something like that. All right, cool. Well, go ahead, Lauren. It looks like we can move on here to question 5.
So can you briefly describe how you got into financial crimes compliance, the career field, and if you have any tips and what you would recommend for those looking to get into the industry? Like, do you have a degree that's geared towards this, etc.?
Well, I have a degree in sociology and I have a couple minors as well. They're not especially geared toward this, but I've always been interested in like the criminal justice, criminology, all of that type of thing. So when I was in college, I had internships at fire departments and police departments, relating to crime analysis, that type of thing. And then after I graduated, I just had like a basic entry level job doing something not related. And it was a family friend that works for a very large financial institution. She had an AML role at the time. And she was like, hey, this company has really great benefits and this industry is growing. And she just had known me since I was like, my whole life. So she knew what I was looking for. And she's like, oh, this is an industry that like no one really know, like you wouldn't really hear about. It's really a word of mouth thing. And so she was just telling me about it. Like, this is a really cool industry. Like you can get into this. And so I didn't work at that company in particular, but the place where I did get my start, the manager there did know my family friend. And so that just kind of helped. And so the company that I started at was more of a consulting place, and a lot of people got their start there. And so I started at that place, and I wasn't there too long before I came over to where I am now. So it was kind of a little bit like by chance in a way.
Networking.
Yeah, networking. And also I just naturally had those interests with, my internships that I had always been interested in crime analysis and all that type of thing.
Now, do you have any certifications related to financial crimes compliance or fraud for that matter?
I have my CAM certification.
Nice. Do you have any interest in pursuing any other certifications, or do you feel like certifications are kind of relevant to the industry or help you in any way?
I think they can help. I really like having my CAMS certification. I went to the Vegas conference just 2 months ago, and that was a really great opportunity. Learned a lot, heard from a lot of speakers and from all different kinds of agencies and companies. And it was just like a really great opportunity for me. And then attending some of the local chapter events. So it's been really great having my ACAMS membership. It just really opens the door to the networking and just kind of hearing, like, we just are kind of just doing our own little thing where we are. And so it's really cool to see the other side of things, like whether that's like how Homeland Security does something, or third-party payment processors, how they work their AML and fraud and what trends they're seeing. So I think it's a really neat way to see what is trending and what's out there, and how like interconnected it is, and how we can all kind of help each other out. And we can all talk about the limitations we have, and that helps us too, like knowing like, oh, if someone's trying to, for example, like buy and sell narcotics using a third-party processing app, and they're using certain emojis and slang that means drug stuff. Like, we don't see that. We'll see like this person sent to transfer using this company, but we can't see the memo or the description. And so they might not even know that. So just that kind of thing, knowing like, oh, just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So now maybe we can send a 314B to them to say like, oh, what are the messages on here? And knowing what kind of dollar amounts to look out for. Are we looking for a series of micro transfers? Because you could send a transfer for $1 and then send a note and just go back and forth. And that may be how people could be talking to each other. That's how criminals can be communicating with each other. So that's just a little tidbit I learned that I wouldn't have known if I wasn't out there at these networking events.
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that the dollar send monies with the messages, because one time in a previous role of mine, I was doing investigations for a third party payment processor like that, and it was like a baby mama, and then and this person that was selling weed through this app, right? And then and same thing, you see all the emojis, which are indicative of drug sales. But in the midst of all this, there's these payments, $1 payments back and forth between the user, the drug dealer, and then his apparent baby mama, I guess, because that's what she called herself. But basically, like, they're messaging back and forth, sending dollars to each other, and she was threatening to like call the police on him and say that he's dealing drugs, blah blah blah, because he's with a different girl now and he's not taking care of his kid. And it's kind of interesting to see that stuff going on, and you're like, like,
yeah, we can't.
Nobody's watching.
Yeah, and from their end, they might not even file SARS, like, because they're not a financial institution technically. So they see the notes, we see the transactions, but without the descriptions or the notes on them. But yet we're the ones that can file SARS, and we're the ones that have their bank account. So just knowing like, oh, we are missing a big slice of information here, we can reach out to you. Like, we can call you, email you, whatever, and have you send over that information.
Yeah.
Good to know.
That brings up 314Bs, which I know, Lauren, we talked about a little bit earlier, and how working cradle to grave allows you flexibility to utilize those options. But yeah, 314Bs, hopefully people that are listening here that work at financial institutions, you know, I get it. They're not mandatory. It's all volunteer. But for sake, it's okay to divulge information like, oh yeah, this person's laundering money at my institution, because believe it or not, we all know that there's bad actors that are abusing your products. They're abusing the products at my institution. They're abusing products across the world. So for whatever reason, when you send a 314B and the response is like, yes, they have an account here, yes, it's open, or no, it's closed, and then it's like, we can't divulge any further information for you. They paid AT&T one time, and you're like, thanks for nothing.
Like, I'm glad it took me. an
It
hour
was closed per our policy.
Yeah, closed per our
Yeah.
policy. Yeah, like the generic response is it's frustrating because the tool could be used for so much more. And I think that like it's just this industry across the board is like discussing, investigations. Like I get it, like we're not allowed to discuss SAR filings, right? That's proprietary information, but you can still say, oh yeah, this customer is a criminal, man. Like if I had handcuffs right now, I would have arrested him myself, but unfortunately I don't, and I don't have the authority to. But that's kind of the information that I'm hoping to receive when I send a 314B, because if I get a 314B about a customer that maybe I've reviewed or done an investigation on, yeah, I'd be transparent. Like, yeah, it's kind of out of pattern money movement that's occurring, right? We're uncertain, the source of the funds. So hopefully you can divulge that information to us, since you're the the source of the funds, and they're worried about what they're using the funds for, and we're like, yeah, we're not really sure. It's just kind of like a pass through. But yeah, that's the frustrating part, is that this business is information sharing business, but obviously there's the PII, like there's strict policies and regulations in place to protect consumers, but you can still talk in general, but also provide a much clearer picture than just saying per policy, we can't divulge this information.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. That's it for the questions here. Let me get this back up on the screen for us. With that, appreciate you, Navin, coming on here, just providing some feedback, and your current situation. Glad we worked out the technical difficulties. Lauren, happy that you're back. Although you're claiming to be sick again, so I probably won't see you on the next recording. I don't know. We'll see.
I'll see you in 2025.
Yeah, exactly. I'll schedule you January 1st. But all right. For those listening, though, we encourage you to look us up on LinkedIn. Give us a connection request. Me personally, I enjoy just getting cold requests, connecting with people in the industry. Find our LinkedIns right here. They'll also be in the description of the video below on YouTube. And if you are a financial crimes compliance professional, like to be spotlighted on FinCrime Insiders, please reach out to us at our email listed in the description. Otherwise, it's fincrimeinsiders@gmail.com. You can visit our website to find some information about Lauren and myself. We also have our audio files available, but we'd love for y'all to like, subscribe, share, and comment on our YouTube channel. You can find that at www.youtube.com/@FinCrimeInsiders. We have 6 going on 7 videos now, trying to grow our subscriber list. Just getting feedback from all of you listening in this industry. But I appreciate you, Lauren, Navin. Hopefully we can talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.